Welcome back, everyone. Welcome to Community Empowerment Through Storytelling presented by Barbara Lawrence. Barbara Ann Lawrence, also known as Kaya, which means grandmother in the Lushootseed language, is a Suquamish storyteller. She shares traditional Suquamish stories that have been passed down through generations since time immemorial. These stories, once told inside longhouses during winter or while gathering berries and medicines, convey lessons about creation, the evolution of plant and animal people, and human experiences. Some stories include characters learning important lessons about respect, responsibility, and the consequences of their actions. It is not the storyteller's role to dictate the story's meaning. Rather, it is for the listener to discover the message they need to hear. Thank you for joining me, Barbara. And before I turn it over, I just want to remind everyone that any questions that you have, put it in the Q&A section, not the chat. But if you just want to, talk about how the session is going with other people, you can do that in the chat. But your questions for Barbara need to go in the Q&A section. All right, I'll let you take it over, Barbara.
Thank you for having me. Today, I'm going to tell you a Suquamish story about community. I think it's a fitting story for the purposes of this audience. This story is how Skykai saved daylight. A long time ago, early in creation, there was a village not far from here where animal people, plant people, and human people all lived together. They all understood each other's languages, and they all helped each other to have a village that was safe and warm and where all people were fed. Now, this was a longhouse village, a canoe nation, but far back in the forest, far back, far way back in the forest, where the sun didn't shine, there lived 3 beasts in the woods. And those beasts, they weren't part of the community. They only came out at night. They only came out to roam from village to village to village and steal whatever they could find. Their home wasn't warm. They didn't have enough food. They didn't have a safe place from the weather. These 3 beasts, they were very, very lazy. They didn't live by community rules. They just would roam at night and go from village to village and steal whatever they could. They stole house planks, they stole paddles, they stole rope, and far back in the woods, they built a shack, and that shack didn't protect them from the weather. The wind would blow through the cracks in the walls, the rain would fall through the ceiling. They couldn't really lay down. They had to just stand up and huddle together. And every time the wind blew, their door would go open, shut, open, shut, open, shut, every time the wind blew. And this door opening and shutting would just make this noise throughout the deep, dark forest. Oh, all the birds and small animals would run away from that place. Well, back at the village that was not far from here, the Longhouse village with the plant people, animal people, and human people that shared hard work, that gathered food, that preserved food, that took care of the little ones and took care of the old ones. They all could understand each other's language and all help each other. They would have great gatherings at this village. They would invite other villages from far off places to come, and they would have huge potluck ceremonies. In front of the village on the beach, there would be a clam pit, and a clam pit is a large section of the beach where hot rocks would be, they would build a fire and they would put volcanic rocks on the fire. And then when the fire was hot enough, when the rocks were hot enough, they would scoop the coals, the fire off and the hot coals off, and they'd put clams and oysters and crab and shrimp and mussels and then cover it all up with seaweed. Oh, this would be the central part of the great potlatch gatherings. All the people would come over to the clam pit and they would uncover this great big display of food, and they would all share this food. When night fell, all the people in the village would go inside the longhouse, and inside the longhouse they would sing, they would dance, they would storytell, they would share adventures that they would have. But always they would tell all the small children to all come inside the longhouse and stay in at night. As soon as daylight fell, the people would go inside the longhouse and stay inside the longhouse until the next day when daylight rose again. And this was because those three beasts in the woods, they were out roaming at night and they were out stealing. And so you wanted to be inside the longhouse, and you wanted anything that you cared about to be inside the longhouse. Don't leave your baskets outside. Don't leave your paddles outside. Don't leave your blankets outside. Bring what you need inside the longhouse. For those three beasts, those lazy beasts, would be out and looking from village to village to village to take whatever they wanted, to take whatever they found and whatever they needed, and steal it back far down the beach, up the high bank, through the deep dark forest where the sun didn't shine, way back there in their shack with the door that went open, close, open, close, open, shut, whenever the wind blew. Well, back at this village, there was Sky Kai. You can say that, Sky Kai. Sky Kai was a blue bird with a round head and shiny blue feathers. Even Sky Kai's feet were blue. He was so beautiful. Sky Kai's blue body was just beautiful, but that wasn't the most famous thing about him. He wasn't the biggest bird. He wasn't the fastest bird. He wasn't the strongest bird. He was an average sized bird, not the littlest, not the biggest. But he was so beautiful with his round blue head and his blue body and his blue feet. But what was most important about Sky Kai was his singing voice. His singing voice. He could stand on a tree stump and sing, and all the people in the village would come to hear him sing. He had so many songs. His songs were gathering songs or lullaby songs or traveling songs or feast songs, or any of the songs, any of the reasons people needed to come and hear an announcement or come make decisions or come be together. He would stand on a tree stump and he would sing, and his beautiful, beautiful songs would tell the people to come and tell them why they needed to come. Well, Sky Kai had a little stepsister, and that was Quachity. You could say Quachity. Quachity is bunny rabbit. That was his little stepsister, and Quachity adored Sky Kai. She would follow him around and ask questions, and he would make sure that she was fed and that she was warm and tucked in at night. Life was pretty good for this village. One day, there was a great gathering at this village, and there was a huge clam pit, and it was so full of so much food, clams and oysters and crabs and shrimp and mussels. Oh, there was so much food. And as the sun was going down, all the guests and all the people, all the animal people, plant people, and human people went inside the longhouse to carry on their celebration all night long inside the longhouse. There was so much food on the clam pit. There was just out there was still had so much food, and that's not uncommon for a great gathering. Well, those three beasts in the woods, the daylight was now dark, and those three beasts came out of their shack in the woods with a door that went open, shut, open, shut, open, shut every time the wind blew. And they made their way through the forest all the way to the high bank where the land met the sky and met the water. And they shimmied down that high bank to the beach, and then they followed their nose all the way to that village where there was all that magnificent leftover clam bake. Oh, they hustled right in there. They squatted right down and they were eating all the clams and all the oysters and all the shrimp and all the mussels and all the crab. Oh, they were just eating and making all these noises. They were so happy. Oh, slime was running down their face and onto their bellies. And oh, they just didn't care. They were just going to eat as much as they could, because who knows when they were going to have such an abundance of food in front of them again, because certainly they didn't gather any food and they didn't build any fires and they didn't make any clam pit. They just happened upon whatever the villagers left. Now, one of these beasts, he reached over, he saw the fattest, juiciest oyster he'd ever seen in his life. And right when he reached for it, his brothers reached for the same oyster. They all three tried to grab that same juicy fat oyster. And finally the one wrestled it from the others, and he realized the reason why all three of them reached for the same one was daylight was up. They had got there and eaten all night, and daylight was going up in the sky now. And so they could see in detail all the clams and oysters and crab and mussels and shrimp that were on the pit. And all of a sudden they all looked at each other and they decided they needed to run. They needed to get home. They needed the humans and plant people, animal people in this village were going to come out of the longhouse anytime now that daylight was up. So they ran to the beach and they ran down the beach, which was really hard work because they didn't do hard work, and they now had really full bellies. And so they ran as fast as they could way down the beach to the high bank, and they had to work hard to shimmy up that high bank, and was so difficult for them because they're full bellies. And they got up to that top of that high bank and they had to rest right there because they just couldn't do it anymore. They couldn't run anymore. They couldn't walk anymore. They just had to lay down on that top of that high bank and gather their strength again. As these three beasts were laying up on that high bank, they recognized this feeling that they had never had. Daylight was shining heat right on them. Oh, they were so happy. This heat was on them. They laid there in that heat and they were so happy, so happy. This unfamiliar feeling of warmth coming from daylight right onto them. They looked at each other and they decided they knew what they were going to have to do. They were going to have to steal daylight right out of the sky. And so as soon as they got their energy back, they made their way through the deep forest, way back in the deep forest where the daylight doesn't shine, to their shack in the woods with a door that went open, shut, open, shut, open, shut every time the wind blew. And they started planning their theft of daylight. They knew they were going to have to make a lasso, and this lasso was going to be the longest lasso anybody ever made. And so every night when they left their shack in the woods with a door that went open, shut, open, shut, open, shut, they were going to have to go to every possible village, every village they knew, and any village that they found along the way, and steal rope and steal twine and steal wool and yarn and string and every possible thing that could be tied together to make the longest lasso ever. Night after night after night after night after night, the three beasts wandered around from village to village. Oh, they would steal wool yarn right off of people's looms. They would steal the twine off of somebody's fishing hook. They would steal rope right off of somebody's longhouse poles. Oh, they just kept stealing. They would look for the opportunity for some food that might be left out, but their main goal every single night after night after night was to make that long lasso so they could steal daylight right out of the sky. Oh, finally, they thought they had enough to tie it all together to have that longest lasso. So they went up to their high bank where the land touched the sky and touched the water. and they waited for daylight to just get so high, not too high, but just high enough so they could throw their lasso around daylight. And they yanked daylight right out of the sky, and they shoved daylight in a bag that they also stole from somebody's village. And they ran back through the forest, way back in the forest where the sun didn't shine, to their shack in the woods with the door that went open, shut, open, shut, open, shut every time the wind blew. Those three beasts, they hung that bag of daylight on the wall in their shack, and they opened it just enough so some daylight, some warmth and light came out of the bag, and they kept it there, and they danced and danced in their shack in the woods that wasn't big enough and wasn't well built, but just was enough for them to stand up and dance and sing and celebrate that they now had daylight. Well, everywhere else, dawn, dawn, dark. There was no daylight. People didn't understand where daylight was. They didn't understand when was day and when was night. Plants didn't know when to grow. Berries didn't know when to ripen. Fish didn't know when to migrate. Hunters couldn't hunt. Fishermen couldn't fish. Oh, gatherers couldn't gather. Oh, it was terrible. Elders were having a hard time. They couldn't stay warm. Little children were hungry. Villages all over were wondering what happened to daylight. Well, at this village where Sky Kai was, the bluebird, and where Quachity was, the little bunny rabbit, um, all the people there were doing everything they could to scavenge around in the darkness and find anything that they could feed to the children and feed to the elders and feed to the most vulnerable ones. Sky Kai stood on a tree stump and he sang a song and sang a song for everybody to come together to solve a problem. And people came together, but they tripped and fell over things and they bumped into things and they got hurt. And when they finally got all together there, Sky Kai said, "We need to send the bravest people of our village out to go find daylight." And so the bravest people stepped forward and they left the village and they went to go find daylight. Well, time went by. We don't know how long because there wasn't day and there wasn't night. They were gone for a long time. And one by one, those bravest people stumbled back in, all bumped and bruised and cut and injured because they couldn't see. They couldn't see enough to find daylight. They couldn't see enough to find each other. They eventually stumbled back, and Sky Guy stood on top of a tree stump and he sang another song and gathered everybody together. And he said, "Okay, we need to send the smartest people out to go find daylight." And the smartest people stepped forward and they went out to go find daylight. Time went by. We don't know how long. We don't know. There was no day, there was no night. And the smartest people traveled out, and time went by, and eventually, one by one, they made their way back, all injured and bumped and bruised and sore and sad because they couldn't find daylight. Sky Kai looked down at little Quachity, little bunny rabbit, and said, "Well, I don't know what's left to do." And little Quachity looked up at her big, brave stepbrother and said, "Sky Kai, I'm just going to curl up. I'm just going to go to sleep and I'm just going to die. I can't do this anymore." And Sky Kai stood on his stump and he took a big breath and he sang his biggest song, calling everybody back together, And he sang and he sang and he sang. And when they were all together again, he said, "Oh, my people, all of us who are strong enough, all of us who aren't suffering, need to make pine pitch torches. All of us need to make these pine pitch torches and then light them on fire and then stand shoulder to shoulder to shoulder to shoulder. All of us together, human people, animal people, plant people, and we need to make our way through the forest together to find daylight." And so they did this. The animal people, plant people, human people, they made the pine pitch torches, and shoulder to shoulder to shoulder to shoulder, so nobody got lost, started walking through the forest. At first, they were aimless. They were just traveling and didn't know where they were going to go or what they were going to do, but somebody heard a noise. Somebody heard a noise. So they started moving the whole line of people shoulder to shoulder to where that noise was coming from. And they followed it till that noise got closer and closer. And then somebody saw a bit of light happening with the noise. And so they started following that light and that noise until there they were outside the shack in the woods with the three beasts, that the shack that had all the wind blowing through and the rain falling through and all that. Well, none of these people had seen that before, but they could tell that was the shack of the beasts. And in there was light, and that must be daylight. So they got quiet and they got closer and closer and closer. And when they were as close as they could be, Sky Kai said, "Okay, my brothers and sisters, I'm going to fly up to the closest tree. I'm going to sneak out on the closest branch. I'm going to get as close as I can to that door that's going open and shut, open and shut, open and shut every time the wind blows. And I'm going to fly in there really quick, and I'm going to save daylight." Oh, little Quatchity, little bunny rabbit said, "Oh, Sky Kai, let somebody else do it, not you." And he said, "Quatchity, I'm fast and I'm small and I'm smart and I can do this. I can see daylight every time the door opens, and I can fly right in there over the beast's head and grab daylight and come back out. I can do this." And so everybody was quiet, and Sky Kai, he flew up to the tree closest, and he snuck out on that branch that was closest, and he waited for that door to go open, and quick like that, Sky Kai flew in that open door, scared the beast, grabbed the bag of daylight, and he was flying on his way out when the door went shut right on Blue Jay. Sky Kai fell to the ground. Quatchity hopped over to him, and the bag of daylight bounced once, and it bounced twice, and then it flew up into the sky where he belonged. All the people, all the animal people, plant people, and human people were all singing and dancing with joy and celebration. Quatchity hopped over to Sky Kai and said, "Oh, my brother, are you okay?" And he shook his head and he jumped up, and Sky Kai was okay. He was okay. The door slammed right on the top of his head and caught some of his feathers and picked him out. So it was instead of having a round blue head, he now had a peak on the top of his head. And instead of being all blue from the top of his head to the bottom of his feet, his peaked feathers in his head were all burnt black down to his shoulders, and his feet were all burned and curled black now. And his singing voice was no longer the most beautiful singing voice, but it was scratchy, croaky-like voice now. Sky Kai didn't mind. He didn't mind the sacrifices of how his body looked different, and how his color was different, and how his beautiful voice wasn't the most beautiful voice, but now a scratchy, kind of croaky voice. He didn't mind that his feet were not blue anymore, but they were black and curled up. He didn't mind. But what he did mind, what Sky Kai did mind, was if anybody tried to say that Sky Kai saved daylight, he would remind everybody that it was the whole community. It was all the people making the pine pitch torches. It was all the people standing shoulder to shoulder to shoulder. It was all the people going together to look for daylight. It was all the people, not the strongest ones, not the smartest ones, not the fastest ones, and not Sky Kai alone, but it was all the people. And that is our story of Sky Kai saves daylight. So when you look around in your world, and if you see Stellar J is Sky Kai. And Stellar J now has the black head with the peak top and the black feet, but Stellar J used to look like a all blue with a round head and blue feet. And he used to have the most beautiful singing voice. A little quick note on this story is that when the Suquamish tribe, I'm a Suquamish tribal member, when we were building what we called tiny shelters, which are even smaller than tiny houses, when we were building tiny shelters to get some of our homeless people out of tents in the woods and give them someplace, communal bathroom, showers, and then these tiny shelters all around so that they were not in tents and not in the woods anymore, but they had these tiny shelters. And then when we were fundraising for this work, the Suquamish Foundation had me tell this story when we were at our fundraising event, and we took away the scariness of the beasts in the woods and said these were people, these what you might call beasts in the woods were people that didn't have services, that didn't have, that didn't have skills, that didn't have proper upbringing or whatever they were, whatever the barrier was for them to have a home and a sense of self and self-preservation. And so we have these stories that are thousands of years old, but we have direct learnings and teachings from those stories to what can we do today.
Thank you, Barbara. That was beautiful. I just want to read some of the comments in the chat. So beautiful, lovely, love it, and thank you for that lovely gift. And thank you so much for sharing. I almost forgot how calming and comforting storytelling is. Absolutely. We also have a question in the chat, and if anybody else has questions, please feel free to add them to the Q&A section. So this person asked, how can storytelling be effectively used to build bridges and foster understanding within diverse communities? And what strategies have you found most successful in engaging different cultural groups through this medium?
Well, that one where we used Sky Kai Saves Daylight was used for fundraising to build the tiny shelters, and we now have the tiny shelters. That was completed before the pandemic happened. After that, also before the pandemic, we fundraised for tiny homes, so they're bigger. They have their own kitchenettes and bathrooms and showers, and like it's a one room, but with a closet and a bathroom, and so they're a step up, a little bit bigger. And now we're building small homes, which have actually a bedroom, and we're building them in a circle. So there's going to be a cluster of them in a circle with a playground in the middle. So these are for different populations. So we found out by doing the tiny shelters that while that got people out of the woods, then the tiny homes got people in them who were waiting to be able to afford, who couldn't afford rent. So we built the tiny homes, and now the small homes, those are for, like, say, single parents with children, so that there needs to be a protected playground and a closed door bedroom, things like that. All of these are, while the Suquamish tribe has businesses, there's fundraising is absolutely necessary because we can't do everything by ourselves without the help of the non-Indian community around us. So storytelling is important for those reasons. It's non-threatening, it's educational. It's what I was growing up, I was hearing these stories. So I'm 66 years old, and when I was little, I was hearing them from our oldest tribal members. And when they were little, they were hearing them. So they teach, and I have a couple dozen of these stories in my head, and they teach compassion, consequences for actions. Usually there's somebody that has to learn a lesson, and lessons are learned if they pay attention. And I go into classrooms and teach these stories, and and it gets people to hopefully come to the Suquamish Museum to learn more about us. I've been asked to tell stories at senior citizen centers around, and what else? Those organizations that are like civic organizations, or like Kiwanis and different business owners organizations. I'm sorry, I'm not, Rotary clubs and all that. And always there's somebody who didn't know about Suquamish stories, didn't know about our territory, didn't know that we were right here and willing to talk and share.
Thank you. Okay, sorry, a new question came in. All right, I was tasked with producing new student orientation for Grays Harbor College. I invited Harvest Moon Quinault, sorry if I mispronounced that, storyteller, to share stories. She and the stories were a huge hit and built a sense of belonging and connection among BIPOC students. Thank you for sharing that.
So I know her.
Yes. Oh, nice. So do you have a personal favorite story to hear and or to tell?
Do I? The Suquamish creation story is really important to me. It's a long one. It's a really long one. It's like a part 1, part 2, and part 3. And children love to hear it because it postpones their bedtime. And it has a lot going on. It has so much going on. It explains our belief that we are not the center of the world, that humans aren't the most important, that the creator first created water, and so water has a very important place in our world. We must protect water, and then land, and then plant people, and then animal people, and last we're human people. And so all of those things, water, land, sky, air, boulders, plant people, animal, they're all our oldest relatives, and that we have to respect them. We have to ask them for help. We have to honor if they give us permission or not, and we have to protect them. So that one, and I mean, just telling you that much, you don't even get a glimpse of it. It's a big, long story that's worthy of listening, and it's so true. It's so, we do call it storytelling. It's not like we believe exactly these things exactly happen with storytelling. It's about learning the teachings that the elders wanted us to pay attention to. So I like that one.
I wish we could hear it, but I don't think we have enough time for that one. You're right. Absolutely. Absolutely. Okay, so fabulous to learn with you, Barbara. Thank you so much. I'm curious if you work with the healing of the canoe and how storytelling is used as a cultural healing practice in treatment services.
If you know of healing of the canoe, then you might have met Nigel Lawrence, Albie Lawrence. Nigel Lawrence is my son. Albie Lawrence is his wife. And so they do occasionally bring me in to tell stories at the beginning or at a specific part in their teachings. I'm not one of their full-time people. I love healing of the canoe. I love what they've done with the Suquamish and the Sklallam tribe, and the they're just worldwide now. They're traveling all over the place, bringing the healing of the canoe to any community, tribe, organization that wants to learn those valuable lessons.
Thank you. I just want to know, I've seen a few questions in the chat. Please ask them in the Q&A section, because it just gets confusing for me going back and forth and figuring out what have I asked, what have I not asked. And I want to make sure we get as many questions to Barbara as we can. Okay, how much of a personal nature should one put into storytelling and still maintain a professional relationship / treatment relationship?
Well, I can say that I have a brother who was a who was a chemical dependency counselor. And he also grew up with me listening to the elders. And one time I visited him at Suquamish Wellness, where he was a counselor. He's now moved on from that profession. But I visited him in his office, which, I mean, he's also a carver, also an artist. And when I was sitting in his office, he was painting a drum. And as he was finishing the last touches on the art on the drum, he said, "What do you think of this?" And he turned it around and showed me. And it was, I can't tell you what it was. It was stunningly beautiful. And it was the last scene. If you think of what a storytelling, and you're having these images in your head like a cartoon or like a movie, it was the last scene of one of the stories that I know very, very well. And that story, well, I always thought it was a perfect story for young boys. And they have a comeuppance at the very end that's kind of tragic, because they didn't want to listen to any of the people that were giving them advice. And so he goes, "What do you think about this for my men's chemical dependency group?" And I was just, oh my gosh, it was perfect. It was a perfect image on a drum, and it was a perfect story for a recovery group. And so what I'm saying is, my brother is a Suquamish member like me. He was a recovery professional, and he incorporated storytelling and tribal art into his group, and it was absolutely perfect. Absolutely perfect. So I think you can bring, I mean, it just makes sense. These stories are metaphors for life, and you know, find the ones that are meaningful to you and use them. When I was finding my way out of trauma, I was a young mom, and I was finding my way out of trauma. A counselor was giving me affirmations, and she said, "Write them on your mirror, write them on Post-its, put them in your purse, put them all around you, put them in your house, put them in your lingerie drawer, put them with your jewelry, and just say them, whichever one comes across." And then a couple of weeks went by, and she said, "What do you think about those affirmations?" And I said, "They just feel like goals that I can never achieve." And she said, "It's going to feel like that until you do achieve them." And now, and for many decades now, affirmations have been something that I absolutely love. So whether it's an affirmation or the story behind that affirmation, whether it's a story, use them. They're meaningful. I mean, for thousands of years, these stories have been with us.
Absolutely. Yeah, and thank you for sharing that story about your brother. Definitely bringing that personal touch to the work makes it more relatable, and I think it helps you connect with the people that you're working with easier. Okay, I know that storytelling is an oral tradition, but I was wondering if this story may be written down somewhere. I would love to be able to revisit this beautiful story.
Currently, none of our stories are written down. One of our tribal members turned one of our stories into a coloring book, and that I know is available at the Suquamish Museum. I don't know that it's available anywhere else. And because I'm now the age that I am, and I learned these stories when I was little, I assumed, and I learned them from a host of Suquamish and Clallam elders. I assumed by the time I was this age, there would be a bunch of us my age, and then all these others that were learning. You know, I started telling stories when I was 12. After listening to them from birth to 12, I started telling stories when I was 12. But there's not enough storytellers, and I'm very worried. We just wrote a grant for that. If we get it and it looks really good, that that we'll be able to pay a Suquamish artist for 18 illustrations for a children's book. And so once we have the illustrations, and looking forward to that possibility of that happening, I've been writing the stories as if they're pages in a children's book. And so I have about a half a dozen of the 24 stories that are in my head that we hope will become children's books, hardcover children's books, illustrated, fully illustrated. So keep your eyes open. We'll make as much noise around those when I believe they will happen. Funding is always an issue. So I might be storytelling as fundraising for these children's books. What I do in my real life, 9 to 5, Monday through Friday, is as I work for the Suquamish Tribes Education Department, helping to create the curriculum, the Suquamish specific curriculum that will go into the public schools and tribal schools here on Suquamish original territory. Suquamish original territory is from the south end of from the north end of Vashon Island to the south end of all the way up into Victoria and both sides of the Puget Sound and some of the San Juan Islands, Bainbridge Island, Blake Island, and the Seattle waterfront, and Mercer Island. That's all Suquamish territory. So any school district that sits on that territory will be given this curriculum that we are creating. But what needs to go with that curriculum is the storybooks, the illustrated storybooks for especially the pre-K through 3rd grade. But we also are planning some young adult versions of these stories. So it's a big lifelong goal that's happening. So we hope this is all going to come into existence.
That's really
I saw
exciting.
one of those questions. I don't have a podcast. I don't know how to do that. I'm a what do they call my generation? I know there's all those slang terms for how old we are. I'm of that generation that doesn't. I believe in it. I watch some, but I don't know how to make it happen for myself.
Well, maybe we can work on connecting you with the right people so that more people can hear these stories for sure.
Yeah, I'm a boomer. Thank you for that, Natalia.
How can storytelling be used in basic therapy practices?
Oh gosh. Those just the same way you use it for any. Once you know these stories, you see who they fit with or the category of people and here's the thing. I've known these stories my whole life, and I was, I don't know, in my 40s, and I was walking down a sidewalk in Seattle, which is I'm not a city girl, I'm a res girl, and I was walking down the street in Seattle, and it was just in my head. One of these stories was in my head, and it was like, like that time when you slap your own forehead and said, I could have had a V8. It was like, oh, this other meaning like just bubbled up to the top of this one story I had been listening to and been telling, and another meaningful part. So whatever stage and age and life experiences you're going through, you'll hear or resonate with the very same story. So the very same story tells a 6-year-old something different than a 12-year-old, then something different than a 19-year-old or a 50-year-old or a 60-year-old. It's the same story. You get what you need from this story. Like I can tell you what it means to me, but the listener gets what they need from these stories.
Yeah, I loved how you put that in your bio as well. So yeah, I love that. Where would we be able to find and support the current education projects for the tribe? And then they put a link asking, oh, you see it on the screen. Is this link accurate?
No. It's really hard work in Western Washington to know the names of the tribes. I'm a Suquamish, SUQU AMISH. And how you can tell us from all the other S tribes is we're the ones at the center of the universe. So, and all the other ones are all the way on the edges. So Snoqualmies are awesome. Suquamish are awesome. Squaxin are awesome. They're all wonderful tribes. They all are. We are Suquamish, Suquamish, and I'm sure that Topher will be able to send you all the right link, and it is www.suquamish.nsn, like native sovereign nation.us. Most tribes have that same suffix for their websites, NSN, like native sovereign nation.us. That's Suquamish.
Hopefully we can get that in the chat. And if not, like you said, Topher will get that information to everyone after the conference. What are some key elements and strategies for creating stories that empower and engage the community? And how can we ensure these stories resonate with and inspire diverse audiences?
I don't create any stories. I only tell the stories that I learned from my elders. We've had well-meaning non-Indians or not so well-meaning non-Indians write whole books and publish them and send them out there because they can afford to do that, and they're offensive and stereotypical and in whatever way financially successful for them, but atrocious and offensive for us. So, and I've never created a story. I only tell the stories that I was taught from my elders, who were taught from their elders, who were taught from their elders. That's not to say that there aren't successful contemporary native story writers. One of our tribal member teachers approached me and said, "Is it okay if I have my Suquamish culture class," and these were 6th, 7th, and 8th graders, create Suquamish stories? And I said, "Of course, absolutely, yes, please do." And they came up with some brilliant young adult stories, short storytelling stories with images, with their own illustrations, and they were very talented, and I absolutely support that inside tribes.
And our last question here is, can we still visit places like Blake Island to continue learning their stories?
Blake Island belongs to the Suquamish tribe. What I mean by that is it's in our original territory, and I don't know that I don't think Tillicum Village still exists, and it mostly what Tillicum Village was their food was very good, and their gift shop was terrible. It was a lot of stuff made in China, little tom things and all that, just that shouldn't happen. But they, when they were in existence, they contacted us because they really wanted to do more, because they knew they were on Suquamish territory. They wanted to work with us. And so there was phenomenal work with Roger Fernandez, who is Lower El Wasclallam and has his degree in education and art, who is also a phenomenal storyteller. He worked with us and Tillicum Village, and we came up with storytelling and song and dance that was like somehow holographic on stage. So we had our dancers, our story, our songs, and with Roger's narration in this foggy holographic thing happening on stage, while they had actual dancers who work for Tillicum Village dancing as well in masks and cedar bark and all that. And it was impressive. It was impressive. I don't think Tillicum Village is happening while the pandemic was happening. It was shut down, and the company who was running it chose not to reopen after the pandemic. It and Tillicum, Blake Island is owned by the state of Washington as a park. So yes, you can visit it. You won't learn any stories there. We, the Suquamish tribe, are working on markers and what they call them. We used to call them narrative markers, and now they call them wayfinders or whatever. So we're working on signage in important places like Blake Island and the Seattle waterfront, and all in anywhere in our territory for information about us, the place where the marker is, and something important in history and contemporary information, and how to find us. So yes, visit Blake Island. Yes, walk on the paths. Know that that's where Chief Seattle was born, and so you're visiting history just by being there. And someday maybe somebody will operate Tillicum Village again, hopefully with sensitivity.
Well, thank you so much. That was our last question. I did see someone in the chat saying that we have to hook you up with a Zoomer so we can get that podcast going. So we're going to hope that happens soon. But we're done a little early. So thank you so much, Barbara. We're going to take